welcome to our Module 2.2, our Creation Care Climate Action Module 2.2 Learning Module launch, and it is focused on women, climate change, and emergencies. So we have a lot to cover. We're scheduled for 90 minutes, and we will be using all 90 minutes. So I will keep everybody on mute. We will have two opportunities for questions. First, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Kim Ambach, and I'm the volunteer coordinator with PWRDF. I'm joined by my colleagues, Janice Bean, who's our communications coordinator, and Suzanne Rumsey, who's our public engagement coordinator. Also a special welcome to Mary Obiero from Church World Service in Africa. And we will be welcoming Bishop Jane Alexander. We will be hearing from both of them in a conversation that is part of the learning module, and they are here to answer any questions that you do have. So in terms of questions, please use the chat function in order to type in any questions as you have them. The first question and answer period will be right after the video, where we will address any questions to Mary and Bishop Jane. Any other questions that you type in just related to the module and where to find it, anything like that, we will address in the second Q&A portion, which will be toward the end of the presentation. So if you aren't hearing your question being answered, that's why. So don't worry, we will get to it. If we don't get to it, or if you have questions after the fact, you're certainly welcome to send an email to me or Janice or Suzanne, and we'd be happy to address them as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Janice to give us a bit of a guided tour.
Thanks, Kim. Okay. This will be quite a feat if I can juggle all of these screens. So I apologize for my problems before. I want to first orient you to where this resource can be found. So I'm going to share screen and just show you, first of all, the page on our website. It says climate change and gender. I hope you can all see that. You can go directly to the URL pwrdf.org/climate-change-and-gender. And that gets you to this page. I also wanted to show you how to find it if you can't remember that big URL. And I hope that this will work for me to go back to the home page. Did that switch? Yes, great, thanks, Suzanne. So the home page I hope is familiar to you. Go to get involved. I hope that you can remember that that's, why am I at this page? I want to get involved. So that's the little clue there. And scroll down to PWRDF at home. And in this little box, it does say creation care. So that will also kind of remind you as you're trying to navigate this. And here is our education focus, the little green icon there, and year 2 learning modules. So that kind of brought us back to where we started there. I hope that's not too, seasick inducing there to be sort of careered back and forth on the pages. So here is learning module 2.1, which hopefully some of you are familiar with. And here is learning module 2.2. And so this is climate related emergencies in women. And this is just a little introductory piece that you can familiarize yourself with. And then what we have started doing with this previous resource, with this previous module, is adding in a function where we can keep track for our own purposes of how well the resource is used. So if you click on here where it says, if you're leading a session, download the presentation slides. So I do that, and then you're just going to get this little invitation to please provide your first name, last name, and email. And that doesn't add you to a list or anything. That just helps us get a sense of how well the resources are being used. And let's see here. So let me go back to year 1, or sorry, my mistake. Let me go back to year 2. And the same happens if you want to also just look at the resource as kind of a very straightforward PDF text. It does have links embedded into it, but it's really just as a, if you just kind of want to read the presentation through from top to tail and understand what is part of the presentation slides, which is what we are basically going to do today. There's also a link to a video piece, which is part of the presentation, but we have it highlighted here so that you can preview it. This is just on our YouTube channel, so you don't have to actually submit your email for that. You can just click on the YouTube link and you'll be able to watch the video. And if you are wanting to present this education resource and you're in a place that does not have good Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi at all, there, you could send this link to your participants and ask them to watch it ahead of time, or you could let us know and I can send you a video, a copy of the video that's not on YouTube. Oh yeah, I'll just quickly show you. I'm going to stop share and I want to just show you a couple of one other thing just to get a handle on what this resource looks like as a sort of a text document. It just it does include these links, as you can see, but it just gives you the flow of all the the sort of the script, essentially, if you are going to be presenting this resource. So I think I'm handing it over to Suzanne now to lead us through the resource.
That's right. And when Janice and Kim and I were planning this, as we did with 2.1, we see this workshop, if you're doing it with a group, probably being a couple of hours or maybe 2 1-hour sessions, depending on the size of the group and the amount of conversation. So we're going to take an hour and kind of give you, walk you through a somewhat abbreviated version. And so if it feels like this seems kind of fast and a bit cursory, be assured that there is in that full script that Jenna showed you more materials and options that I'll try to mention as we go along. So Janice, could you bring up the slide deck and we'll. So in this learning module, we were asking how women are impacted by emergencies caused by climate change related emergencies, be they fires, floods, droughts, or other sorts of emergencies. How are they differently impacted than men, and how are they responding? And we're going to do that as we did with 2.1 by learning from our partners, reflecting biblically, and considering some opportunities for action and giving. So this workshop, as we've done with others, begins with an opening prayer. And I'm going to invite everyone to stay on mute and read it with me. I found this lovely opening prayer. It's written by Kelly Ngeti, who's the Coast Region Volunteer Coordinator in Kenya with the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa. So this prayer comes from where our dear friend Mary Obiero lives. Dear God, you, the Creator, saw all as good. You created me as one of your own and mandated me to take care of all your 6 days' work. I have taken for granted these responsibilities and turned them to powers to decide what grows and lives, where and when. I am uprooting what you gave for my survival and replacing with what I think is beneficial to me. I have cut down trees and erected structures, tampered with the water catchment areas, toxified the soil, chemicals, and the atmosphere with carbon. Warmed the seawater, filled the land with garbage, killed wild animals unnecessarily, and interfered with the ecosystem. Now I am suffering the repercussions. I have not enough clean water. Land is not yielding enough crops for my survival. Air is becoming harmful. Sea levels are fast rising, killing and taking all I have. Temperatures are rising so high, I feel I will not survive. But then I acknowledge my mistakes. What I have done is not your will, not what you commanded me to do. Forgive me for my actions and the actions of all who have plundered our home, turning it uninhabitable. I take this day, this time to repent, to do all within my abilities, to love, cherish, and always, always protect your creation. Let now love flow down through your planet Earth, so that we may reap abundantly, live peacefully and in harmony, just as you want us to do. Amen. So after beginning with an opening prayer, we invite you to present to a group and to have some discussion around a report released at the Bonn Climate Change Conference in June 2022 that explains why women often experience the impacts of climate change differently than men do. And it also highlights the critical role women play in responding to climate change. The text document has a longer summary of a very long report, but here are some key points from that report that was released last year. The differential impacts highlighted include in Africa, an increased trend in migration of men from rural to urban areas is being driven by extreme weather events. Women are left behind to care for the land and households, often without the legal or social authority to do so. Places prone to conflict and climate-induced disasters, for example, Colombia, Mali, and Yemen, experience increases in gender-based violence. This can include child marriage as a way to secure funds and recover losses in countries such as Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And extreme weather events such as droughts make everyday tasks of women and girls, such as collecting water and firewood, that much more difficult, forcing girls to abandon their schooling. Slide. The report also highlights how women can and be and are agents of change. When they have equal access to decision-making opportunities, they're able to make more sustainable decisions. For example, they help improve school attendance of their children, increase food security, develop greener mobility patterns, and greener energy demands. And in addition, adapting to climate change can result in opportunities for women to access more resources and participate in decision-making at all levels, especially as gender norms continue to shift. So that's a report that offers a lot of facts and information about this differential impact of climate-related emergencies for women. While contexts and conditions vary greatly, it isn't only women, though, in the global south who are disproportionately impacted by climate change emergencies. And so we're now going to hear a wide-ranging conversation from two PWRDF partners, one from Kenya, the other from Canada, as they talk about the connections between climate change emergencies and gender in the places and with the people they live and work. And just before we hear that conversation and see it on video, I'd like to introduce to you Mary Obiero, who is the Director of Relief Development and Protection at Church World Service Africa, based in Kenya. For over 20 years, Mary has worked with partners implementing integrated programs in WASH, food security, community livelihoods, education, migration, and human mobility, youth empowerment, emergency response and disaster risk management, with gender sensitivity lenses in Africa. She has been involved in the development of strategic plans and engaged in capacity building, resource mobilization, institutional transformation, and engagement in community development programming. And as you'll see from the bag she's holding in that picture, since 2021, Mary and Church World Service Africa have partnered with PWRDF and the Canadian Food Grains Bank to respond to the severe drought affecting Kenya. And Mary and her husband are the parents of 2 young adult children. The other person in this conversation is the Right Reverend Dr. Jane Alexander. Born and raised in England, Bishop Jane relocated with her family to Canada in 1990. After several years of academic pursuits in educational psychology, Bishop Jane was called to ordain ministry in 1998. In 2008, she was consecrated Bishop of Edmonton, where she served until her resignation in 2021. And since January of 2022, she has served as assisting bishop in the Territory of the People, the Anglican Diocese in Central British Columbia. Bishop Jane has served on numerous municipal, provincial, and worldwide committees and been involved in the church's response to the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire, as well as the 2021 Lytton, BC wildfire and BC floods. So I will pass it over to Janice, who is going to share the video conversation that we had.
Well, welcome to Bishop Jane Alexander and Mary Obiero together today as our continuing exploration of the theme of climate change and gender. We're going to look specifically at the impacts of climate change related or climate change induced emergencies on questions of gender. Because as we know, and as the UN has documented quite clearly, women are impacted differently than men when climate change related emergencies happen, just as they are impacted differently by climate change in general. What do climate change related emergencies and gender have to do with one another anyway? And maybe I'll start with you, Bishop Jane, from where you sit. What have they got to do with each other?
Well, I think I like to start with what the UN Commission on Women said, which was that climate crisis is not gender neutral. And I think it's the idea that whenever there is a climate catastrophe or just the changes in the climate that we're seeing, then already existing gender inequalities and difficulties are amplified, and they pose unique threats to women. We have, so I think they describe it as a threat. Climate change is a threat multiplier for women and vulnerable people, and that it includes problems with economic difficulties, but also existing problems, particularly around gender-based violence as well, are amplified as stresses and availability and limited access to services and healthcare and things increases. Then the effects on the more vulnerable among us in society, usually women and children, are amplified. So I think that's maybe a hidden piece of what's going on, in the same way that kind of during the COVID pandemic, we had this kind of silent pandemic of gender-based violence that was increasing across, certainly across Canada, and I believe across the world actually, that is there, that thread is there in climate change and climate-induced disasters as well. And so I think anyone that thinks that these things are not connected, I would say, please, please, please go to the UN Women's site and just read the very basic ground document, and you will certainly, you'll change your mind.
Yeah, it's obvious that climate change and gender, they are intertwined. The effects of climate change actually destabilizes the ecosystem. And when I talk specifically on Africa, in the women in the Horn of Africa, when the ecosystem is destabilized, then that means their means of livelihood, their means of sources of income, they actually destabilized, and in some cases, they may not even exist. And in this case, it's the woman who faces very much. For example, In areas where we have been providing food for emergency or relief food, the reality is that in these particular communities, especially the pastoral communities, one man has more than one wife. And if the emergency comes as a problem caused by climate change, then the man literally takes off. They move to either urban centers and actually leave women and children behind to face the consequences of climate change, face the famine, lack of water. We have seen cases where women are trekking 10 miles to bring home just 4 gallons of that water. When there is emergency, that distance even increases. And it's basically for the woman to do that because it's the woman who is supposed to cook the food. He needs the water to cook the food. The man will not be there. On the other hand, the woman and the girls are left home without food, as animals are the source of income. So basically, when we are looking at the effects of climate change in the Horn of Africa, the most affected person is the woman, because it's the one who actually meets the effects of climate change on a daily basis.
Both from thinking of programmatic responses, so relief programs and then longer term development programs, but also what we need to be advocating for, what kinds of responses need to be happening in terms of climate change induced emergencies and gender. How does gender need to be taken into account?
I think the first thing that we need to think about is to do a climate change vulnerability assessment. Get really to understand the depth of the challenges, the depth of the gaps, and the depth of the resources that is available, the capacities that exist and the capacities that do not exist. When we have done this assessment, then we can develop a climate change with the gender focus adaptation framework. And within that framework, we can be guided on what can be done where, at what time, and with who and by who. Looking at that, then it means that the involvement of climate change adaptation or any responses, even if it's emergency response, it needs to be inclusive, in the sense that we need to bring everyone on board. We need to look at the stakeholders, we need to look at the government, both the national and the county governments, and even the local government at the village level. We need them to get involved. We need the women to get involved, not just women at the community level, but we need to be looking at women at my level, women above my level, and women at that particular community level, so that we support each other to be able to do a capacity assessment and come up with where we have gaps, where we have capacities, what we need from outside and what do we have from within that we can be able to look into. And another thing that I would want to bring to the attention is the aspect of the indigenous knowledge in adaptation on climate change. Climate change did not just begin today, and climate adaptation has not begun this evening. It began a long time ago. Communities have been adapting to climate change using their own knowledge. So it will be very important for us to try and within that vulnerability assessment, try to get to understand the indigenous knowledge.
Well, I so agree with the points that Mary made, absolutely. And I think we may be many miles apart, but the same underlying things need to be put in place, because I think when climate disaster or change hits, it kind of, there are already kind of some systemic marginalization and discrimination pieces in place that are just amplified by that. And so the chance of being able to sit down and look as a whole community and to look at adaptive change is so important, because then we're trying to set things up, not just to affect the immediate disaster, but we're actually trying to set things up for the future that will be healthier across the board. And I think it's an opportunity. And when we do that, we kind of have a net approach so that we have a much more complex way of looking at how our systems are working, rather than what can happen in an emergency. And we saw it happening in response to the fires that we had, the terrible forest fires and then the floods, where people come up and there's just a discrete kind of list of tasks. Well, we need to do this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this. And the women were juggling all of that. And I think a more adaptive approach that allows more people from different areas to speak into it, men as well. But in terms of what they're seeing, it means we come up with a much better plan. So involving not only people who are doing housing support and food support, but also people who are providing healthcare, social supports, and education, because it's usually, for us, we found it was the people, it was the elders in the community, the teachers and the healthcare workers who really knew what was going on and who really knew the needs of the community immediately, but and long term. And that becomes really important if you're trying to make an adaptive plan for the long term.
I wonder if both of you have an experience or someone you've met through your work that kind of illustrates what you've been saying at a general level, someone that helped you really out of their lived experience helped you understand, you know, what this is all about.
There is.
Yeah.
There is, and she's one of our Indigenous pastoral elders, and her name is Pauline, and she looks very deeply at a situation, and unlike me, because I talk too much and too quickly and everything else, but Pauline is a deeply spiritual person who takes in what's happening and then shares kind of some very deep thoughts. So she had particular things that happened during the emergency. One was she was looking around, we talked about Indigenous knowledge, but in the region that was taken out by the fire, a lot of the Indigenous food sources were completely destroyed. So that wasn't just fruits and vegetables and medicines, but it was also some of the traditional hunting grounds were completely destroyed, and the salmon run in the river there, because the fish that people had used a lot of the time and then preserve and eat year round, that had already been reduced by climate change. And so Pauline was noticing that even when some of the elders came back into the community and some people came back into the community, they were still so traumatized, and the things that would help them was that sense of being home, being able to see home, taste home, smell home, as it were. And so encouraging people to go out, and if they were on the land and if they were hunting or fishing or collecting food, to collect more, to be able to share it with people who came back. So these traumatized people, so that they could feel they were home by having the foods they recognized. And also she spoke about, you would see people walking around after the disaster had struck, and she talked about they were there and they were doing the things that needed to be done, but behind their eyes it was as if their soul, their spirit and their body were completely disconnected, and needing to find ways that people could be together just to talk in culturally appropriate ways, but providing the space that was needed.
The reality is that in Africa, people do not have adequate information, or they don't have information at all. Things just happen, as you say. But specifically, I wanted to know if women have information about climate change. And for that reason, we used participatory methodologies. And there was this one lady called Agnes in Kitui. Agnes is now 89 years old. By that time, he was 87 years old. We found Agnes to be very, very instrumental in a way that Agnes understood what happened in that community 70 years ago, how things looked like, how the water sources were, how the vegetation was, how the planting, harvesting, weeding seasons were. Agnes could actually explain. And there's a huge thing. Over 70 years, a lot has changed. Even people in that particular community were really shocked that things have changed that much. In that particular community, any river had water flowing 70 years ago. It had water flowing. At the moment, it's just about 5% of those rivers that have water flowing. In the same particular community, people planted at a specific time of the year and they had a bumper harvest. That means they had enough rain. At the moment, that rain, it can come after 4-5 years or not come at all. So we made Agnes one of our climate change champions in that particular community. Not for anything else. Let Agnes walk around and let Agnes just tell people what climate change is. Because from where I'm standing, Agnes understands climate change much better than what I've read in books.
I'm seeing a really wonderful connector here of elder wisdom that is so key in our lives in so many ways, but just that long-term perspective that only elders can have.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, because like Agnes, Pauline and the other elders, they knew what the land was like before, and because they know that, they can not only talk of change, but when there are times when they've seen the land heal.
What would you want to say to PWRDF about what we need to be thinking about in terms of applying a gender lens to our work with you?
One thing that I would want your team to put in mind as we integrate gender into climate change resilient programming is to try to look at long-term programming. Long-term programming that will involve women at the moment they need to be involved. And not just women at community level. I'm looking at women at regional, national women will be able to put advocacy issues on the tables of governments, tables of funders, tables of those who must be included and those who must hear those voices.
Also, I think that what we're seeing is that when people are displaced, then we're finding that with the younger people, then they're losing that knowledge of food supply on the land they come from. And so to help with the education of that piece in terms of the natural hunting and fishing and food gathering, because it's getting lost when they come out of that community and they're gone for a long time. And there was already a problem with young people coming out of the more rural communities, going to urban centers and not wanting to go back again. And that's all being compounded now. The other piece I would say is that's the education around response and what's happening, moving into children. With Fort McMurray, with the fire there, and then with also the fires in the Lytton area, we found that it was months and months afterwards that children would be able to find the words to talk about how it felt. To have to run away from the fire. We know the fire in Lytton, for example, came so quickly that some people had such little time to leave. The backs of their legs were actually burnt by the flames as they ran away from their place, right? And it took many months for some of the children, and often just through drawings, to describe how frightened they were. Frightened of the fires, frightened of the change, frightened they would have no home, frightened that their parents couldn't protect them anymore. And all of that coming out down the road, which needs help and support. So I think what I'd say to PWRDF is to have a flexibility of approach. I think when climate disasters happen, there is people want to jump in quickly and to fix things and to help with the immediate need, and we need that, and it's really important. But there needs to be, I would say, another thread that comes alongside, which is the long-term education and support of the community to help it to have health restored, and to understand what climate change in general is doing to that community. So I think it's the two parallel things coming alongside. You can't just do one.
Can you describe a little bit and maybe illustrate those connections? So emergencies, displacement, violence.
Well, I think it's the mental health effects of climate disaster and climate change are really far-reaching. And what we've seen across Canada, really, I would say, is that there is an increase in the kinds of coping mechanisms that aren't necessarily healthy. So there's an increase in alcohol, there's an increase in substance abuse in places. There is an increase in people just leaving, as Mary had said, just not being there. And then sometimes, you know, people will come back and the situation isn't how they expected it to be, and nothing is the same in life anymore. So you have very vulnerable people who are trying to hold everything together, and people coming with these big feelings. That's a gross underestimation, but these big feelings of how life should be, and there's these feelings of desperation and loss and despair in some place. Children are seeing increased levels of adults losing it, you know, and just not being able to cope. And so then they are having behaviors modeled for them that are not good behaviors to see. And so this is this kind of multi-generational edge, I think, to gender-based violence, that if we're not very, very careful, it's going to really gain a foothold. I really do believe that, because we're seeing it just with after COVID, and then with in the climate affected areas, we're seeing it even more. So it's being exacerbated. And I think we've got to be very, very careful.
They are exactly like what Bishop Jen has talked about. I don't think I have something to add. What I want to say is that as we do emergency response, we always say it's life-saving. We need to include gender-based violence as an item for life-saving. Yeah. Because you can give me food, but if I'm abused and psychologically I am damaged, you're gonna not recover me.
The slide deck. Actually, though, maybe before we go back to the slide deck, we could open it up for the Q&A, and we'll just stay on the gallery view. I'm aware that I don't think Bishop Jane has been able to join us. Being an assisting bishop, I'm sure something has come up. But we do have Mary with us, Mary Obiero from Kenya. And so want to take just a bit of time while the video is fresh in your minds to pose any questions or comments that you have for Mary. Her camera is not cooperating, but she is with us and is quite audible. So because we're operating on multiple screens, it would be helpful if you could type your question into the chat or use the raised hand function so that I can see you, because we've got a great turnout today and I can't see all of you all at once. But if there is a question that you have for Mary, speak now or type them. Maybe while you're thinking about a question, Mary, I wonder if there is anything that, you know, as you were watching yourself and Bishop Jane, anything that you wanted to add to what you were saying, or a point that you would like to make, just putting you on the spot a bit there.
Thank you so much, and good evening or good afternoon, everyone. I think this is a topic of great interest, and great interest to everyone, but great interest and of great concern to people in Horn of Africa and women for that matter. And what I would want to add, when I listened to the video, what kept on going into my mind is as we talk about climate change and effects of climate change, I think what is very, very critical is looking at drivers of climate change. what are those aspects that are driving climate change, and how do we incorporate them into development activities, especially what I talked about, long-term development activities, what that means that we need to have integrated programming where we can have program activities that actually address a number of drivers of climate change. More importantly, I think bringing on board at a higher level the West that has been actually having more effect on climate change on the South, because I think people in Africa, we are facing consequences that we may not have contributed to that large magnitude, but we are the victims of climate change. So in that case, we need to look at long-term programming. I know there's a lot of advocacy that is going into climate change related or climate action related issues, but unfortunately, we are not seeing this on the ground.
Yeah.
It's more in meetings, it's more in conferences, it's more in world gatherings. We are not seeing this thing materialize on the ground. I think it will be good for us to start looking at it, because what we would like to get is a livable future for that local woman in Tana River, in Marsabit County in Kenya.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. I now see there's some questions in the chat, so we'll move to those. But I think your point about it's not enough for us to just keep mopping up after emergencies or providing emergency relief, but really looking seriously at what's causing these emergencies, the mitigation and adaptation efforts that need to be made or move from words to action on the ground. Colleen asks, are the women in power in Kenya, if indeed there are any women in power, sympathetic to the needs of women at the community level? Do they share the same experiences?
Come again?
Pauline is asking if there are women in power in Kenya who are sympathetic to the experiences of people like Agnes at the community level. And do those women in power come out of some of the similar experiences at the community level?
So I would say, yes, we have women who are very empowered in Kenya, like myself. And we sympathize or we connect with women who are suffering in two aspects. For example, myself, I have a vision and I have a passion for working with poor people. And for that reason, anything that affects poor people, I feel it. And when I feel it, I have to do something. And for that reason, alongside my work, I've been able not just to do either emergency response, but also community development. But I've taken even sometimes my personal time to just sit with women in the village, those mothers who cannot get food to feed their children, and just talk to them, because in many occasions, those women do not get someone to listen to them. So listening to them and helping them out is very critical. We have women who do that because also they're in a position that enables them to do it. At the same time, we also have women who are empowered and who have laid down our women folk. And I would say majorly these are women in the political space. They are in the best position actually to advocate for financial resources allocation. They're in the best position to influence policy, and they're in best position to provide support. But in most cases, this has not materialized to support or to be of help to these women. So I would say, yes, we have a number of women in the Horn of Africa, in Kenya, who are empowered. At the moment, I think we have a women group that are picking up the climate change justice related issues, including ACT Alliance members. And I am one of those members and would want to see how we can take some of these issues to Africa Union and see how this we can start picking these issues at that particular point, because there are a number of things that are intertwined in climate change, in the climate change impact, especially to women.
Thanks, Mary. And Mary mentions the ACT Alliance, of which CWS is a member, as well as PWRDF, a global, Geneva-based, but global alliance of church-based organizations responding to emergency situations globally. Another question, is there any work being done to prepare for organized action in Canada/Kenya when disasters occur? Sort of preparing the capacity for response. And Mary, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about the joint project that CWS has had with PWRDF and the Canadian Food Grains Bank.
Thank you very much. I think our relationship with the PWRDF started way back in 2016 when we had drought emergency in Kenya, and we had NABA, one of staff at the PWF visit. He did not just go to that one county that was affected, but he went to a number of arid and semi-arid counties. And we started working on a program, designing a program. It took a bit of time, but at the moment, from last year, April, we have been able to serve about 10,000 households. In Kenya, a household has an average number of 6 people. So we are talking over 60,000 people. We have been giving them food ration for a month. And our food basket actually has been quite comprehensive in a way that it's food that will cover the family food needs for 1 year. In addition to providing food, I think we have also been very categorical to look into issues of accountability and quality assurance. We have also been able to sensitize the communities we work with on protection against sexual exploitation and abuse. And we have taken some of these issues very, very seriously, because we want to educate, especially the women, because they're the ones who become the culprit. We are continuing with that particular project. I think we have just signed a new contract to be able to provide more food to 2,000 households in Marsabit County, and we'll be doing that for the next 3 months. We're looking into the bigger picture because, yes, there is emergency, but we would want, when people come out of the emergency, to start looking at early recovery. How can they recover? Because they have lost their livelihoods. So we are also starting to think about climate change resilient adaptation programming. And we hope that we can take this to the next level. I think this program has also, the Canadian Food Grains Bank and the PWRDF program has also helped us to leverage resources from other partners. I just mentioned about ACT Alliance. We were able to get some resources from ACT Alliance members, and we scaled up to maybe, at the moment, I think we are reaching over 13,000 households in Marsabit County.
That's wonderful. I'm conscious of time, and I do see that there are other questions in the chat, but what I'm going to suggest is we move on, because we will have another time for Q&A at the end, and we'll come back to the questions that have been posted in the chat. If you have other questions as we go along, please be welcome to put it in the chat. But I think for now, we'll give Mary a bit of a break and ask Janice if could bring up the there it is. And I'm just going to, there we go. Okay. All right. So we've been fortunate to have present with us, Mary, to answer your questions. That won't always be the case when you're making or doing this workshop perhaps at your parish at some point in the near future. So we've developed a series of questions out of the video to invite you to explore a conversation with those participating, and those are listed in the slide deck. I won't go through them right now, but they try to get at some of the issues that both Bishop Jane and Mary were exploring. But just to mention that there is a video from Church World Service in Kenya that does speak to the program that Mary was describing briefly to us, and really gives you a really good visual sense of the work that's being done together. And also a story that's been posted on our website about that relationship between those that we touched on briefly in the video, connections between conflict, climate change, and gender-based violence, and a look at the work of our partner Maison Dorcas in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So along with some questions for you to consider. So there is more material there to look at. And then we offer a bit of a Bible study. There are 2 pieces to it, and we're going to look at one today. But first, as a way of introducing it, there's an oft-used saying originally from China's Cultural Revolution that women hold up half the sky. But then the questions arise, what happens if the sky is falling? What if there are torrential rains coming down, or the smoke, ash, and flames of wildfires? Or what happens when nothing falls from the sky, when drought leads to failed crops, dry wells, and death of livestock and eventually people? What are women to hold up then? And how are we, together with PWRDF partners, to respond to that together, so that together we might all hold up not just half the sky, but the whole sky, the whole of God's created order? So with those questions on our hearts and minds, we're going to explore a little bit the connections between climate change related emergencies and gender through the lens of Scripture. And at this point, I'm going to buttonhole, if she's still with us, Con Betty, if you wouldn't mind, to read this passage of Scripture for us. Betty, are you able to do that? If you could unmute. Thank you.
Yes, I can do that. You want me to start now?
Yes, please.
Okay. When the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his chariot drivers went into the sea, the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out with her with tambourines and with dancing, and Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea."
Thanks, Betty. And the next slide. This brief passage marking the Israelites' successful crossing of the Red Sea to safety from Pharaoh's Egypt offers us another hint of the leadership role played by women in the Exodus story. So you'll remember that earlier in the narrative, it is midwives who save Hebrew male babies from Pharaoh's order that they be killed at birth. And it is Pharaoh's own daughter who takes in the infant Moses and raises him after he is placed in a basket in the Nile by his older sister Miriam. Now the Israelites are on the run from the slavery and oppression of Pharaoh, but also the economic model that by turn has brought feast and famine to the land, along with a series of plagues. Today, we might describe those catastrophic events as climate change related emergencies. And so as they flee, another woman leader emerges, the prophet Miriam, Aaron's and Moses' sister. Though she is given the final lines of a hymn attributed to and sung earlier by Moses, biblical scholars believe that this hymn was actually composed by Miriam, who is identified as a prophet, a title not given to Moses. She draws other women into the singing and dancing, and it is Miriam, through Moses and Aaron, who leads the people of Israel on their journey in search of the promised land. What we're going to do for the next 10 minutes or so is to have you, Kim's going to send you off into breakout rooms, and we're going to have you explore the questions that we've developed as part of the Bible study. And Janice is getting them into the chat there. Think of a situation. Oh, no. Okay. Okay. Think of a situation in Canada or overseas in which a climate change related emergency has called forth the leadership of women. The situation might be one that you were involved in yourself. What form did that leadership take? How did it involve others? What struck you about the way in which the women or you responded? Were there any echoes of Miriam's story and role? Faced with a similar situation in the future, what would you do the same or different? So trying to make some connections between your experience and this story from the Hebrew scriptures. So just want to mention, and Janice, if you could change the slide, that there is a second passage, this time from John, in which Jesus forgives an adulterous woman, which one would wonder, what are the linkages there? And if you could move to the next slide, Janice, we try to explore what are the fractures in our society and between ourselves and creation that story helps to lift up, and how can we bring healing, be responsible for the healing that needs to happen. So there's a second opportunity provided. Then, after the Bible study, we move to a section called ACT. And just very quickly, this is a chance for you and your parish to have a look at the emergency preparedness of your own parish or your own community. And PWRDF has a resource on Canada Emergency Response that helps you to ask some of the key questions, to do a kind of parish audit of the emergency preparedness of your parish. And so if you could move to the next slide, Janice, it opens up the chance for you as a parish or as a community to ask questions like, how well is your parish prepared for climate change related emergency? If your parish has a plan in place, and some do, does it need updating in any way? When was it last reviewed and updated? Especially in light of what we've learned in this workshop, and in addition to which, in the event of an emergency, what provisions have been made to address the specific needs of women? So, if your parish is an emergency shelter site, what kind of provisions are being made for women who come to it, for example? So, a lot of conversation and discussion, and an opportunity to either develop a plan or review a plan might have. And to take that to the diocese and check about their emergency preparedness plan and what needs to be done, either to develop one or to review what is there. And then also as part of the ACT process, we invite, and there's more detail again in the PDF text, the full text for the workshop, a chance to explore how to respond to the needs of women in your community, and perhaps even to build a relationship with a local agency serving women, especially in times of emergency. And so to sort of go beyond your own community, parish community, and look at the organizations that support women, what they might need on an ongoing basis or during times of emergency, and developing a plan to support an organization during a crisis. And there's also an opportunity, again, in the full text of the PDF, to consider inviting someone from that organization to come and speak with you and to pose a series of questions, have a dialogue, and begin to build perhaps a relationship with them. So time isn't going to allow us to look at that any further, but that material is all there as well for you. And then finally, we have a give section. The women with whom PWRDF collaborates are confronting climate change related emergencies. ever more frequency and long term, as Mary spoke about. And so, as ever, we encourage support for the work that Mary and others are doing by offering a gift in Thanksgiving for their work to PWRDF. So that brings us to almost the end of the workshop. We're going to have a closing prayer, but first we're going to take about 8 or 10 minutes to just go back to some Q&A for Mary, or about the resource more generally, about the climate change work that PWRDF is engaged in. I'm wondering if Naba's still here because he's our resident expert, but just a chance to answer questions before we, and I encourage you to put those in the chat. We did have a couple of a comment and some questions when we were speaking with Mary, so I don't want to lose those. Emmanuel, who's joining us from a Ugandan partner, Arue, mentioned that it will be important to involve women and girls in the overall decision-making from the grassroots to the national level. Women and girls should be involved in policy formulation such that women and girls solutions are included in actions. And I think that reinforces what Mary was saying, is that this, women at the grassroots level and at the national decision-making level and everywhere in between to be involved. Barack asks, would it be possible to also find out how men are affected by climate change? What is their feeling even as they move and leave their family behind? Is it driven by escaping the situation, or is it a result of helplessness to provide as men? And Mary, I wondered if you could just pick up a piece that we had to edit out of the video conversation, was about what happens when men in the face of drought leave with their animals in search of pasture, and what happens in that situation. If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Thank you. It's like you waking up one morning and you go to your bank account and you had 1 million Canadian dollars and you find it open. You find it without anything. That is what it means for those men, because the animals that they have lost, that is everything they have. That's their livelihoods, that's their wealth, that's their power. I would say that is it makes them to be called men. So when they lose everything, then they are also going through psychological related challenges. Unfortunately, no one seems to be paying attention. Most organizations that are looking into gender-related issues are women-focused. At the moment, we don't have anyone trying to support men in such situations. So the men also need support. It will be slightly different specialized support, but they need support. In the past, governments and other agencies have actually worked on a restocking program where they have helped the men to regain the animals after the drought. The government has either bought the animals for the men to be given back, or other organizations have done so. There are areas where people have worked with the animal insurance, and the insurance companies have paid them. But now with the continuous climate change, the situation looks very different, in the sense that, like in Marsabit where we are working, they have missed the 5th rain season. That means even if you restocked, those animals will not get pasture and water to eat and water to drink. So in my opinion, we need to start looking at supporting men psychologically, providing psychological support to men, and helping them to process that they need to change the way their livelihoods. They need to look into other alternative livelihoods, not necessarily saying we must keep animals, because climate change is not favorable for livestock production.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, very helpful. Are there other questions? that you can either type into the chat or use the raised hand feature just to help me see. I think you've all explained it so well, Mary, there's no questions.
That's good. But people can reach to me directly if there are more questions, they want to learn more.
Sure.
I'm happy to support where I can, and I'm also happy to learn from others. So if
Okay,
you have something interesting that can help us learn and process a number of things, I think we'll be happy to pick that as we move on.
I see Patricia's got a question and I'll just open it up for her, but I should mention that Mary is coming to visit Canada next month. Is that right? Is it already? No, April.
In April.
In April, yeah, but it's coming soon. She's going to be spending time in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So those of you joining us from those provinces may have a chance to meet and hear from Mary. We're really looking forward to her coming as part of the Canadian Food Grains Bank's people-to-people program. So she's going to be spending a few weeks here with us. Patricia, over to you. What is your question?
My question is a follow-up to the comment that Mary made about the men needing to find an alternative to raising animals, but isn't that their source of food and other things that are necessary? It seems to me, wouldn't it be just as hard to raise vegetables as it is to raise animals?
Thank you, Patricia. Raising animals is harder than raising vegetables, but this is a cultural issue. They have been socialized that way, and they believe that raising animals is the only thing they should be doing. But looking at the climate change impact and the predicaments, the trends in climate change, things are not going to improve today. We are likely to be having more prolonged droughts. And when the droughts are gone, we are likely to be having floods within the same communities. And for that reason, the men insisting that they must keep animals is not going to help them. Even if they keep animals, they need to change how they do it, because you can get one man having 100 cows, but actually the same man can keep 3 improved breed of animal, which he can actually keep at home. He'll be able to get more milk, and he'll be able to sell the milk and use that money to meet other family needs. It's going to come with training, and like me, from where I'm standing, I would want to actually engage young people more on this, the youth, to learn new skills, to learn doing things differently, because climate has changed and we cannot continue doing business as usual. We are also encouraging the same men to take their children to school, because if your children are educated and they have a job, they have a salary, whether there is drought or not, they'll have money and you'll use that money to buy food. So there are a number of things that we can do with the communities together, but it's going to be a long-term process. And given that it's cultural, we will be flexible and walk the pace that they can actually catch up.
Thanks, Mary, that's helpful.
Thank you.
And thanks for your question, Patricia. I see we're at 2:30 and want to honor people's time, but just want to read the comment from Karen in the chat that's important. Thanks, want to underline the need for Anglicans to join others outside the church's bubble. There are plenty of actions which already are happening in the broader secular community around, I presume, around emergency, climate change emergency responses. While I hasten to emphasize that over my years since birth as an Anglican and an adult for 84 years, the mission and action and partnerships PWRDF represent and raise before us is surely the most relevant Anglican reality in Canada, which I enthusiastically remain supporting and after stopping all other support of the institutional church. So thank you for that word of confidence, Karen. Much appreciated. So Janice, I think we need to move to the closing prayer. And I'm going to again invite you all to make sure you're on mute. And we'll read this prayer together. And this is a prayer for creation by Rabbi David Mevorach Seidenberg. And it's part of a collection of prayers that have been gathered by the For the Love of Creation campaign, which is a Canadian ecumenical and interfaith initiative to address climate change, to lift up creation care. And it just, I think, reminds us that care and concern for creation is crosses faith traditions, and that we're all part of our care and concern for God's created order. Janice, I think we need to move back one slide. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there we are. Okay.
There we go.
So let us pray together. God of all spirit, all directions, all winds, you have placed in our hands power unlike any since the world began to overturn the orders of creation. Please, God, give us wisdom and skillful hands to heal the skies and the earth from our sins. Yikum Purkan Lishmaya. May salvation arise for the heavens, that the blessings of the sun flow over us for life and not for death, for blessing and not for curse. As it says, I will open for you the expanses of the heavens and will empty out for you a blessing beyond what is enough, and earth's fruit will not be destroyed because of you. God, full of compassion, remember your covenant with all life, the covenant of the waters of Noah. Spread a sukkah of compassion and peace over us, over all life species. Surround all our relations with Shekinah's radiance. Water them with your river of delights in all of their habitats. Then the bow will appear in the cloud, joyful and beautified with its colors, and the tree of life will return to its original strength, so that we and our descendants may merit to live many days on earth, like days of the skies over the land. Blessed be the life of the worlds. Amen.
Amen.
So that is the end of our webinar, and that brings us to the end of the learning module. Thanks to everyone who joined us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send Kim or Janice or I those questions, and we'll be happy to follow up with you.